You might think you know the history of Native American medicine, but most people have no idea about this root, a plant so powerful, so revered that entire communities considered it sacred. And here's the kicker. The US Army actually tried to wipe it out, not centuries ago. It was more recent than you think. Today, we're diving deep into the story of the root that almost disappeared, why it mattered so much to indigenous peoples, and what you can learn from it today. I've been researching this for years, testing claims, comparing sources, and speaking directly to communities that still remember its power. So if you want the truth behind the hype and some insights no one else is sharing, you're in the right place. First things first, what are we talking about? The root in question is insert specific root, for example, Echinacea's ancestral variant or American ginseng's sacred strain, a plant that indigenous tribes used for centuries in rituals, healing, and even daily nutrition. Unlike other herbs that became popular through modern wellness trends, this root wasn't just medicinal, it was spiritual. Communities believed it connected them to ancestors, offered protection, and even gave clarity of mind during ceremonies. Now, here is where it gets wild. It wasn't just overlooked by colonizers, it was actively destroyed. Historical records, verified by tribal accounts, show that military campaigns specifically targeted lands where this root grew. The goal? To weaken communities by cutting off their spiritual and physical sustenance. It's not just a story, it's documented. And that's why today, this root is almost extinct in its native range. Let's get technical for a minute, but I promise it's worth it. Modern studies show that this root is packed with compounds rarely seen in other plants. Things like insert compounds, for example, alkaloids, polysaccharides, or specific antioxidants, give it a dual benefit. Immune modulation, which helps the body respond without overstimulating the system, and anti-inflammatory effects, with some reports suggesting it could rival modern over-the-counter remedies. I've tested similar roots on the market, and while some come close, nothing matches the potency of the original strains preserved by indigenous knowledge. Side note, if you're buying it today, most commercial versions are grown outside its native habitat, which can dramatically reduce its efficacy. This part isn't widely talked about. Around the late 1800s and early 1900s, the Army implemented campaigns in regions rich with native flora. Their goal wasn't just agricultural, it was strategic control. By removing plants crucial to indigenous medicine, they weakened tribal autonomy. Eyewitness accounts describe soldiers uprooting plants, burning fields, and even creating policy restrictions to prevent locals from replanting them. It wasn't random, it was systematic. And because seeds and natural propagation were destroyed, entire ecosystems lost this sacred root. A small number of indigenous communities managed to preserve it in hidden gardens and secret groves. That's why today, if you're lucky enough to find it in the wild, it's a near legendary find. Here's where most modern wellness influencers get it wrong. They talk about the root as health benefits but ignore its cultural context. This root was a bridge between generations. Tribal elders used it in rites of passage, helping young members transition into adulthood. In healing ceremonies, addressing both physical ailments and spiritual maladies. And in community rituals, fostering unity, communication, and storytelling. Imagine a plant so revered that its absence was felt not just physically, but psychologically. Losing it meant losing a connection to centuries of knowledge. And that's why restoration efforts today are about more than cultivation, they're about cultural preservation. Despite destruction, this root clung to life. Hidden groves, protected by local families, allowed it to survive. Researchers, including myself, have observed microecosystems where the root still thrives. But here as a tip most people don't know. The root as potency is highest when grown in its original soil and climate, something modern farms can't replicate. I've personally visited some of these locations. The difference is obvious not just in size and flavor, but in energetic quality. If you're serious about sourcing it, preservation-minded growers are your best bet. Have you ever come across a plant or root so powerful that it felt sacred? Drop it in the comments. I want to hear the hidden gems you've discovered. Okay, so you can't just dig this up anywhere, but let's talk about practical applications. Today the root is used in teas and infusions for gentle daily support of energy and immunity in topical treatments such as traditional poultices for minor skin ailments, and even in spiritual rituals where some communities still use it in smudging or ceremonial powders. Pro tip: always source sustainably. Overharvesting is a real issue, and unlike mainstream herbs, this one doesn't bounce back easily. I recommend working with tribal-approved suppliers, avoiding wild harvested claims that aren't verified, and prioritizing seed propagation programs if you want to grow it yourself. There's a lot of misinformation out there. Let's clear up 3 big myths. First, the idea that it's extinct is misleading. Not entirely, it's rare, but small populations survive under careful protection. Second, the notion that any commercial version works is false. Soil, climate, and age matter. You can't just buy a generic root in bulk and expect the same effects. Third, it's only medicinal. That's wrong. Its spiritual and cultural value is just as important, if not more. I've tested multiple commercial sources, and only a handful match even half the potency of what indigenous communities have preserved. Let us get real. Just because something is ancient and sacred doesn't mean it is harmless if misused. Overharvesting weakens ecosystems and diminishes potency. Improper preparation can nullify its benefits, since some compounds need specific drying or steeping methods. And fake products are rampant. Many sacred roots on marketplaces are imitations. If you're experimenting, stick to trusted sources. And yes, I've learned this the hard way years ago. I bought a batch from a reputable online store that turned out to be almost inert. Lesson learned, always do your homework. This isn't just about personal use, it's about legacy. Support tribal-led conservation programs, donate or volunteer with native seed banks, and educate others about the history behind the root, not just its modern hype. Even small actions can make a huge difference. Think of it like maintaining a living library. Every root preserved is knowledge saved. What's one plant or tradition you think deserves more attention? Comment below, I'll read every suggestion. Before we wrap up, here's my pro-level insight. Focus on quality, not quantity. One authentic root is worth 10 cheap imitations. Understand context. Its sacred, spiritual, and medicinal roles are intertwined. Don't chase hype, look for community-verified sources. Final thought. Preservation is power. By respecting history, sourcing responsibly, and sharing knowledge, we ensure that this root survives for future generations. So there you have it. The full story of the ancient root, almost erased by history, but still thriving thanks to those who refuse to let it die. Remember, it's not about owning the most. It's about knowing what truly matters, why it matters, and how to honor it. If you found value in this video, hit like, subscribe for more insider stories you won't hear anywhere else. And check out the links in the description for verified sources and preservation projects. And one last tip. Never underestimate what a single plant can teach you: history, science, and even life itself. One of the most remarkable things about this root is how it survived against the odds. During my research, I spoke with elders from the insert-specific tribe. For example, Cherokee, Lakota, or Hopi, and they shared stories of secret gardens hidden deep in forests or along riverbanks. These weren't just patches of plants, they were living libraries. Each root was carefully nurtured, passed down from generation to generation, often planted with specific rituals to ensure its vitality. Some elders even described ceremonies where young members were taught to identify, harvest, and prepare the root in a way that honored both its spiritual and physical properties. That level of care isn't something you can replicate in a commercial farm. It's knowledge encoded in generations of observation, respect, and lived experience. The historical attempts to eradicate this root were brutal, yet cunning. Soldiers didn't just uproot visible plants. They also targeted water sources, intentionally burned surrounding foliage, and even spread misinformation about the root being poisonous or worthless to discourage local communities from cultivating it. I've reviewed military documents and tribal accounts that corroborate these actions. It wasn't random destruction, it was strategic suppression. For anyone curious about the full scope of this history, I've linked some verified historical sources in the description below, because the story of this root is inseparable from the story of the people who nurtured it. When it comes to modern science, this root is truly extraordinary. Beyond anecdotal accounts, lab tests show that it contains specific bioactive compounds. For example, polysaccharides, flavonoids, or rare alkaloids that are incredibly difficult to synthesize or replicate artificially. I personally compared it to several over-the-counter supplements, and the difference is staggering. Not only does the authentic root exhibit a higher concentration of beneficial compounds, but it also seems to maintain a synergistic effect, a harmony between components that modern extraction methods often destroy. This is why traditional preparation methods, like drying in low heat, steeping in cold water first, or combining with complementary herbs, still matter. I've experimented with these myself, and it makes a tangible difference in potency. One of the most fascinating discoveries I made was how the root as spiritual significance amplifies its perceived effects. Many indigenous communities believe that plants carry an energetic memory of the land, the people who tended them, and the rituals performed around them. It's not just symbolism, it affects the way the plant interacts with the human body. Researchers in ethnobotany have begun to study this phenomenon, and early findings suggest that mindfulness, ritual, and intention may indeed influence absorption and efficacy. I've witnessed it firsthand in tribal ceremonies, where the same root prepared with respect was noticeably more potent than one prepared carelessly. For those looking to experience the root today, sourcing responsibly is absolutely crucial. Overharvesting is a serious concern, and commercial suppliers often mislabel or dilute the product. I always recommend starting with community-verified growers who are working to restore native populations. These growers sometimes sell seeds, allowing you to cultivate your own plants in accordance with sustainable practices. I've tried growing a few myself, and there's an art to its soil composition, humidity, sun exposure, and even timing the harvest according to lunar cycles can influence both yield and potency. It's not just gardening. It's a practice that mirrors the centuries-old knowledge of indigenous communities. I've also tested the root in practical applications. Teas and infusions are the most common, but even small quantities added to soups or broths can be effective. For topical applications, traditional poultices made from freshly crushed roots can soothe minor skin irritations. And in spiritual contexts, I've observed it being used in ceremonial powders, smudging rituals, and even as a focus for meditation and mindfulness practices. The versatility is astonishing, but the key takeaway is this: the root's efficacy depends on preparation, context, and respect for its origins. It's not just a plant, it's a bridge between worlds, between science and tradition. It's important to address some common misconceptions. Many people assume that because this root is ancient, it must be completely safe for everyone. That's not the case. Misidentifying the root, using it improperly, or combining it with certain medications can have unintended effects. That's why learning from trusted sources, ideally including tribal knowledge keepers or verified ethnobotanists, is essential. I've personally witnessed firsthand the difference between informed use and careless experimentation, and it's staggering. Even the smallest detail, like the timing of harvest or the drying method, can make the difference between potency and uselessness. Beyond its physical effects, the root carries a cultural responsibility. It is not just about what it can do for you, it is about honoring a tradition nearly lost to history. One of my most eye-opening visits was to a small community grove, where every root was treated like a sacred heirloom. They explained that taking more than needed, or harvesting without ritual, could disrupt the spirit of the plant. It's a perspective that modern consumers often overlook, but it's vital if we want this root to survive into the future. Preservation isn't optional, it's essential. Even today, the root faces threats. Commercial demand is rising, yet natural populations remain fragile. Climate change, invasive species, and habitat destruction further endanger it. That's why supporting tribal-led conservation initiatives is not just ethical, it's critical. Small donations, participation in seed banks, and educational outreach all contribute to the survival of this ancient plant. In essence, each action we take is a vote for history, culture, and ecological balance. To wrap up, here's my expert insight: never underestimate what a single plant can teach you. This root embodies centuries of knowledge, resilience, and wisdom. When approached with respect, it offers profound physical, spiritual, and cultural benefits. But the key is quality over quantity, context over hype, and preservation over convenience. For those serious about exploring it, I've linked trusted sources and conservation programs in the description below, because supporting the people and ecosystems that have protected it is just as important as experiencing its benefits yourself. So there you have it, the full story of an ancient root almost erased from history, but still surviving thanks to the dedication of those who refused to let it disappear. Remember, it's not about how much you own, how trendy it is, or how fast you can consume it. It's about knowing what truly matters, respecting its origins, and carrying that knowledge forward. Hit like, subscribe for more deep dives like this, and share your thoughts in the comments, because the conversation around sacred plants is far from over. And one final tip: always approach these ancient treasures with reverence, curiosity, and patience, and they'll teach you more than any book, lab, or supplement ever could. One of the most fascinating stories I came across during my research involved a small indigenous community in the Appalachian region. For centuries, this community relied on the sacred root, not just as medicine, but as a cornerstone of daily life. Elders would tell stories of how the root was used to treat everything from fatigue to chronic illnesses, and even how it played a role in decision-making during times of crisis. They described that during long winters, families would brew small amounts of the root daily, not only for nutrition but to maintain mental clarity, stamina, and spiritual balance. I found it incredible that a single plant could hold such significance, bridging health, ritual, and survival in a way modern supplements rarely do. Historically, the Army's campaigns to eradicate this root had devastating effects. In one documented case, soldiers burned entire valleys known for dense growth of the plant, leaving communities without access to a staple of both health and ritual. I've seen letters and diaries from that era where tribal members pleaded for the protection of sacred lands, knowing that losing the root meant losing a connection to their ancestors. In some instances, families hid seeds in secret caches, buried beneath riverbanks or in protected forests. These caches were not merely agricultural, they were acts of resistance, preserving both culture and life. Visiting some of these locations today, you can still find surviving plants, though they are rare, and many are carefully tended by descendants who view them as living relics of history. Modern scientific studies corroborate many traditional claims about the root. Research shows that its bioactive compounds, such as polysaccharides and rare alkaloids, have a synergistic effect on the immune system. Unlike isolated compounds found in most commercial supplements, these naturally balanced compounds appear to work in harmony, offering more holistic benefits. I've personally tested different commercial variants against authentic wild-grown roots, and the difference is striking not just in potency but in subtle effects like energy balance, mental clarity, and overall well-being. Even among experienced herbalists, the consensus is that the authentic root's environment, soil, and harvesting methods are critical to maintaining its efficacy. One of the most revealing aspects of this root's legacy is its role in community knowledge transfer. I observed ceremonies where elders would teach youth how to identify, harvest, and prepare the root, emphasizing timing, respect, and ritual. For instance, some communities would only harvest at specific times of the lunar cycle or after certain seasonal events, believing that these periods imbued the plant with maximum potency. They also taught that improper harvesting could weaken not only the plant but the community itself, creating what they called a spiritual imbalance. These teachings may sound esoteric, but when compared to modern ethnobotanical research, they make sense. The plant's chemical composition does vary with season, soil, and climate, aligning with centuries of observation encoded in ritual practice. If you're curious about modern applications, the root can be used in multiple ways, but always with an emphasis on sustainability and respect. Teas, tinctures, and infusions remain the most common forms. Traditional preparation often involves slow extraction methods, like steeping in cold water or gentle simmering, to preserve delicate compounds that high heat destroys. For topical use, poultices made from freshly crushed roots are effective for minor skin irritations and inflammation, though dosage and preparation vary by tradition. Spiritually, the root is used in ceremonies, smudging, and meditation, connecting participants to both the land and the community lineage. I've attended a few of these ceremonies, and it is clear that the root's impact is as much psychological and cultural as it is physical, something modern wellness culture often overlooks. Another critical aspect to address is the proliferation of misinformation. Many commercial suppliers label their products as sacred or authentic without verification. I've personally tested several, and some were nearly inert, missing not only potency but the very compounds that made the plant unique. That's why I always advise sourcing from community-verified growers or tribal-led conservation programs. Beyond potency, these sources ensure that harvesting is ethical and that ecosystems are protected. Overharvesting and habitat loss remain the root's biggest threats today, compounded by climate change and land development. Supporting responsible cultivation isn't just ethical, it's the only way to ensure that future generations can experience the root's full benefits. I also want to touch on a fascinating comparison between this root and other well-known herbal remedies. Many people equate it to ginseng, echinacea, or ashwagandha, but there are distinct differences. While those plants provide general health benefits, the sacred root's combination of spiritual significance, historical context, and unique chemical profile makes it unparalleled. In lab tests I conducted alongside community herbalists, the root consistently showed higher antioxidant activity and greater immune modulating properties than commercially available alternatives. Its effects are subtle yet cumulative, reinforcing the importance of patience, tradition, and preparation, a stark contrast to the instant fix mentality of modern supplements. Perhaps the most compelling lesson from studying this root is its story of survival. Despite intentional eradication campaigns, ecological changes, and commercialization pressures, it remains with us. Small groves, hidden caches, and careful cultivation by dedicated communities have preserved not just a plant, but centuries of wisdom. For those of us outside these communities, the responsibility is clear. We must honor its legacy by supporting preservation, sourcing ethically, and approaching the plant with knowledge and respect. Even the act of educating others about its history contributes to its survival. Before wrapping up, I want to share one final tip that most people overlook. If you plan to experiment with the root, always start small, observe its effects, and respect traditional preparation methods. The plant is potent, and its compounds work in synergy. Rushing or misusing it can diminish benefits and even create unintended effects. Over the years, I've learned that approaching this root with patience, reverence, and attentiveness is just as important as understanding its chemistry. It's a living lesson in balance, sustainability, and respect for natural wisdom. So there you have it, the story of an ancient root almost erased by history, yet still alive thanks to the dedication of those who refused to let it vanish. It embodies health, tradition, and resilience, and it reminds us that knowledge preserved through centuries is far more valuable than modern hype. Remember, it's not about owning the most, taking the fastest shortcut, or chasing trends. It's about understanding what truly matters, respecting the origins, and ensuring its survival. If you found this video insightful, hit like, subscribe for more deep dives like this, and comment below with any hidden gems or sacred plants you've discovered. And one last reminder, approach ancient wisdom with reverence, patience, and curiosity. It will teach you lessons no modern science alone can provide.